Good evening, folks. Welcome to another edition of our what we're calling Porch Conversations with Fruits of Justice. If you didn't join us next week, we had some good conversation. Some of the trainers here, just about the state of things, what's going on now. We got to some questions. We didn't get to them all, so we wanted to join again this evening to try and answer some of the questions we didn't get a chance to respond to last week. So before we go any farther, just give a chance for the trainers that are with us tonight to introduce themselves. We'll start with Jess. Do you want to go first?
Hey, everybody. My name is Jessica Rodriguez-Becker. I'm based in Philadelphia. I'm very happy to be with you tonight.
Thank you.
My name is Conrad Moore. I was on the call last week also. I am based in Atlanta. Well, above Atlanta. I live in Doraville, Georgia. It's just a hop, skip, and a jump from Atlanta. And right now, I'm actually calling from Marietta, Georgia.
Excellent. Thanks for being on the call, Justin Conrad. My name is Nick. I was on the call last week, currently in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and grateful for everyone tuning in tonight. So before we actually get into some of the questions, I was wondering if we just want to have some loose conversation around what we've seen, what we've heard, reflections, feelings on the way things are and the way we feel since last week.
Yeah, I last week was tough. This week is starting out pretty tough as well. I'd like to hear from Conrad. I'm hearing out of Atlanta, several protesters and people standing by shot with what do they call less lethal rounds. One of them, a young boy, a teenager, 16, shot in the head, and then also a pregnant woman. So we hear a lot of harsh language about people rioting, but I wonder if it would be appropriate to consider that the police themselves are also rioting, and they are maybe the real rioters.
Yeah, that's the feeling here in Atlanta. I've heard that expression since I've been here, and it seems appropriate. And it's not new.
Yeah.
Or unexpected. It's just videoed. That's the only difference. I've been in black skin for a few years now, and I've discovered that there's a downside when it comes to engaging with the police. Had I known that before I accepted this brown skin, I may have made a different choice. But I've been, all my life, I've had these kinds of encounters with police, what we're seeing on video. I mean, when I was 16, I was in school, I was in high school, and I had an after school job. And one day I'm on my way home from work. It's dark already because we're in Philadelphia. It's like fall or winter, and I'm standing on the corner waiting for the bus. Now I'm a high school student, and I also have an after school job. And I'm waiting for the bus, and the police roll up because there's something going on somewhere near where I'm standing. I see the bus is about a block away, so I don't want to move because the bus is just a block away. So the police jump out of the car and they tell everybody to get off the corner. Well, I'm not just randomly standing on the corner. I'm actually waiting for the bus. And if I look down there, I could see it's only a block away, officer. I mean, 10 seconds later, I'm on the ground with a gun in my face, and I'm being barked at with all of this profanity. So that was my experience as a 16-year-old. And so what I think a lot of people don't understand is they recognize that people of color have a tense relationship with police, but too many people think that it's because we're raised to have that our parents tell us to have these tense relationships. But no, our school teachers and our parents tell us the same thing most other school teachers tell us that the policemen are your friend. If you find yourself lost somewhere, look for a police officer. So I'd heard all of that stuff. So, you know, I wasn't expecting stuff like that to happen to me, but it did.
Right.
I mean, that's just one of my encounters. Another encounter I was 17 years old. I was arrested, tried, and convicted, and the police literally invented the crime. My only crime that night was that I was out after curfew. So I was arrested, but then when my mother came to pick me up, the crime was the police observed me breaking into a car. They saw me in the car trying to steal the radio. And at that point, I wouldn't have known how to break into a car. I mean, unless I had a brick or something, I just wouldn't have known how to do that. And I definitely wouldn't have known how to dismantle a radio from a car. However, those were the charges. And I went to court and I was tried and I was convicted. And so I was on probation until I was 18. Um, so yeah, and I've never known a time in my youth where we didn't have stop and frisk. You know, I know over the past 10 or 15 years, we've been talking about it like it's a new thing. But when I was a young person growing up in Philadelphia, I've never known a time when stop and frisk didn't exist, where the police would just stop you, grab you, throw you up against a wall or a car and search you. So nothing that's happening is new. But the only thing that's new about it is that we're catching it on film. We're getting it on video.
Well, I appreciate you sharing those, what must have been very difficult and traumatic stories, experiences. I appreciate you sharing that with us. And I've been reading in several instances of some of the cities where the police are rioting. They're then imposing curfews, which the police then use to go crack down on some of the people they see still protesting. So that curfew violations and a physical response from police due to those is still occurring today also.
I think it was it Atlanta, Conrad, where we saw the couple in the car tased, the windows were broken, that they were tased in their car and then
they were college students. And if you saw that video,
yeah, I saw it.
The trauma that, you know, I mean, that was very serious trauma on both of those children. That was ridiculous. The word ridiculous loses some power these days because you know, things like that are just beyond ridiculous. But the aggressiveness of the police, you know, the young lady is screaming and crying and trying. She literally is trying to do what you're telling her to do. You're barking at her. You got these men in uniforms with guns pointed at her, yelling at her to get out of the car. She's telling them, I'm trying to get out of the car. I'm trying to get out of the car. She's screaming. She doesn't understand what's going on. And they would not relent. It's almost like I'm a movie buff. I like watching movies. Sometimes I like horror movies. And there are these horror movies that imply that these demons, they feed on fear. You know, these particular demons feed on fear. So the more frightened you are, the more of a frenzy it whips them into, because they're hungry for your fear. And it almost feels like that. You know, when police recognize that they've got somebody, and they recognize that this person is horrified and afraid and being traumatized, it's like it becomes a frenzy. More of them jump in. They're grabbing, they're kicking, they're pushing, they're knocking one another out of the way just for a chance to get a blow in. It's horrifying to watch, but it happens way too often.
Yeah.
Well, I think what you said too about the videos is bringing about a lot of people that are just now witnessing it for the first time. I certainly didn't ask for my white skin, and yet here I am and living the white life. So for a lot of folks like me, there's a lot of awakening to this, and with that is coming a call for change. And one of the differences now from when I think some of us involved with Future Justice even started this work, there's a growing awareness of of racism being more of a systemic issue rather than just some kind of interpersonal phenomenon, like a lot of people still think it is. So if we're looking at systemic level of policing and the police brutality that's happening and the police rioting that's happening, what do you think systemic change looks like? That question is one from last week from Jeff. What does systemic change look like?
I think one of the things that they're calling for, many of us are calling for right now, is you'll hear and see the hashtags defund the police, end policing now, and there's a spectrum of what that looks like, anywhere from as mild, I'll say, to reform, and I do mean that. Reform would be a mild response, to abolition, right? And there's people are afraid. What does it mean? Are we going to be unsafe? But that is one of the topics that I think is really important. But when you see, out of New Jersey, we saw that New Jersey corrections officer reenacting George Floyd's death. He took a knee on his buddy's neck while protesters passed. When you see, he's a corrections officer, so he is in charge of the tending, right, and the protection of our incarcerated citizens, who we don't think of, I guess, or treat like citizens, certainly. But they are our brothers and our sisters and, our moms and dads in there. And when you see the two officers who pushed that 75-year-old man down on the ground, how he split his head, he's bleeding out of his ears, and they walk by and even pull one of their own away who was trying to help or who seemed inclined to help. When you see those two officers sent home without pay, and then their entire, all of their colleagues on their particular unit resign from that unit in protest, then the bad apple theory starts to go out the window, doesn't it? Because, okay, these two, I'm going to use Trump's word, thugs, because it's more appropriate here, push an old man, he splits his head, they keep walking, and they get sent home without pay. And then their entire unit resigns in protest. And then as they're walking outside of the precinct or the union lobby, whatever it is, that building where they're walking out, to be sent home, they are met with masses of people, both their colleagues as well as other white people, they're applauding and supporting them. So tell me about the bad apple theory where you say it's just those two guys, we just got to get them off the force. And what the heck are those other 100 people doing? Why are they clapping? Why did the other 57 not say, you know what, you're right, they should not have done that. I'm glad you got them, Sarge. I'm glad you caught them, Commissioner. No, we're going to resign in protest that they were poorly treated. And I don't know how much more egregious it can be to push a 75-year-old man down on the ground, see he's bleeding out of his head, a white man. So if you really want to, your grandpa, white people, push him down on the ground, let him bleed out of his head, and then you are upset when those officers are held to account. So is it a few bad apples? I mean, when we're talking about reform, I personally do not think that reform handles that, because an entire system, the whole unit resigned, and they were outraged.
Yep.
And what's outrageous about that is that they would get away with putting an old man in the hospital.
Yeah, they should all be fired. They should all be, and the 57 who resigned from that unit, they have shown us who they are, and they should be fired. The two officers should be fired, and those other 57 should be fired, because they've shown us who they are, and they've shown us to who their alliance is. Correct. Their alliance is not to the community, their alliance is to one another. I spoke about this a little bit last week, Jessica, about the whole this bullshit about bad apples, because I remember mostly, when I think about it, the best case I can think of is the Abner Louima case, where Abner Louima was picked up by police officers, and he was taken to the police precinct, where he was then sodomized with a broom handle or a mop handle.
Plunger.
and they punctured his intestines. That's how far they went inside him with that stick. Now, the problem with the whole bad apple thing is those officers went to where they knew they could do that safely. In the police precinct, there are sergeants, lieutenants, captains, and maybe even commissioners or inspectors or whatever, but there's hierarchy. And there are other police officers who those officers who took him in there knew that they could do whatever they wanted to do, regardless of how horribly and how loud Abner Louima screamed. They knew that nobody would intervene for him. Not only would they not intervene, but if it got out and if it became a problem, they would be protected. That's that. Those are the police forces that we have. Those are the police precincts that we have. Those are the police units that we have in every city in the country. So when they look us in the eye and give us that bullshit about bad apples, I always point to the rest of y'all. I don't want to hear that shit because y'all know who they are. Y'all need to stop protecting them, but you won't. That's why the system needs to be dismantled.
There was a group in Florida I read, I was trying to find it here, that it's a police organization. Trying to find which one it was. I don't know what that means exactly, but they actually offered jobs to those 57 from Minneapolis in that story that you're referring to. So once they were fired and the rest quit, this organization in Florida, and I can't find the name of it, but offered them all jobs.
Although, to be clear, they did not resign from the force. They just resigned from the special unit. They're still on the force. They're still on payroll. They're still policing, which is terrifying. But they were in a show of solidarity. Well, if you don't want us to police this way, you don't want our comrades to police this way, we're not going to be on this special response unit. And you can staff it and find other people to do that. So they're still getting paid. They didn't actually put their money in jeopardy. But yes, yeah, people are offering, if you don't have a home there where you can feel safe, you can safely brutalize people, you can come on over here. We'll keep you safe over here. You can do it here. It's ridiculous. And the amount of support that they give to each other makes the entire bad apple theory bunk, number one. And two, the rest of the sentence is a few bad apples spoils the bunch. Right? I mean, we forget the whole sentence is, if you leave them there, which you have for too long, the whole bunch gets spoiled. So even if a rookie cop goes in with good ideals, I have police officers in my family who I love dearly. It's not that I don't understand how we can, our husband, our brother, our father who comes home at night that we love, and they're out there and we're afraid for their lives. I get that. But we also know that, a murderer doesn't murder everyone. An abuser doesn't abuse everyone. Just because they're sweet and kind and gentle at home with you does not mean that they are safe in that position, keeping other people safe, either as perpetrators of harm or looking the other way. And I'm sure that many of us who have officers in our family know the consequences for going against rank. So if you truly have someone that you think is a good cop, they're not even safe on the force because they don't have security if they're whistleblowing or if they are speaking out against wrongdoing. It's not okay for them. So you have to also consider that when people are calling for either reform or abolition, when I call for that, I am not saying that only looking out for civilians. I'm telling you, it is not good for the police officers either. It is not good for them. We have to find another way to do this. It does not mean lawlessness, but we have to envision what we mean when we say safety. We have to envision what we mean when we say justice. And it does not have to look like this. Because right now, what we have is not keeping anyone safe. It really isn't. I don't feel safe when I get pulled over. And I, many years ago, decided to never call the cops. Because I don't feel safe when they come. And I don't
We-
feel safe for the people that I'm calling them about. You know, if I want someone to turn down their music, I don't want their life ended.
Yeah, we in the African American community, I can speak. Well, I can't speak for all African Americans, but many of us are hesitant to ever call the police. Also, because one thing for sure, when the police get there, whatever is happening is about to get worse.
It's gonna get worse.
I mean, you just can count on it. Whatever is happening, it is about to escalate. And as soon as the police get there, if it was crazy before, it's going to be crazier once they get there, because they come in and they start yelling at everybody. And look, and even if you're the person who called the police, now you're being disrespected.
That's
You're
right.
being disrespected. And the unprofessional language they're allowed to use with us is an escalator, you know, because they come in and it's get the fuck this and get the fuck this and get the fuck down and blah 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 blah. And I realize that language is going to be difficult for some people to hear, but that's what we hear as soon as the police jump, you know, get into our neighborhoods, jump out of the car, and it's profanity laced commands from the gate, profanity laced commands. So it's disrespectful in many ways. But the other thing about systemic change is not enough people understand that this is not simply about readjusting the behavior of specific officers. When you're talking about changing systems, you're talking about changing the identity of the system. I mean, of
Right.
the institution. So all of our institutions have a foundation, have a foundational document that tells them who they are. And unfortunately, in most of our institutions, the foundation documents are themselves racist, the documents that give these institutions a sense of their purpose. So the purpose of the police, when the idea of policing first came about, the purpose itself was racist. So these attempts to tweak it over the decades, where we've actually pretended to try to tweak it, have not been successful, because we have not dealt with the main issue, which is identity. And so I think there is a very good argument for dismantling police and not leaving the communities without anyone, but starting from scratch and starting with reshaping the identity of the police, so that they're not still on the old foundation, which was a racist foundation. And it didn't start in the 19 or the 18 or the 17 anything. It started in 1641, when three people, James Gregory was a Scotsman, Victor was a Dutchman, John Punch was an African. They all were accused of the same crime in Jamestown, Virginia. Yet, because John Punch was an African, the decision was made that not only would he be punished with lashes, but that he would spend the rest of his life in perpetual servitude, in slavery. So they enslaved a man. So the two white guys were punished, but then they went on to live their lives. They served their debt to society. But for the African, he was sent into perpetual servitude. So 1641, the foundation was laid for the legal system that we have right now. The decision was made that people guilty of the same crime would be treated differently based on their race. So when we look at the disproportionate minority incarceration, it is not because of a particular racist judge. Not that there aren't racist judges. It is not because of a particular racist police officer. Not there aren't racist police officers, but we're talking about systems that no longer require overt racist people to be a part of it. The systems are self-perpetuating. They no longer require a racist police officer or a racist
You don't have
judge.
to actually actively hate Black people in your heart.
Exactly.
And I don't care You know, when when the video about what's the football player who said, "Look into my eyes. I'm so sorry. I don't mean it. I apologize," because he said that kneeling during the anthem was disrespectful to the flag, and he got a big
Drew Brees.
Yeah, Reese.
I thought it was Breeze.
Breeze.
Drew
Yeah.
Brees, yeah.
And he said, "Well, look into my eyes. I'm so sorry. I want you to understand. I don't care if he means it." You know, what did James Baldwin say? How many years ago now? He said, "I don't care. I don't know if you hate me. I know I'm not in your unions. I know what kind of books you give my children. Like, honestly, it doesn't matter to me what's in white folks' heart. I mean, the ones that I'm close to, I have a relationship with, sure, but I don't care. I want to see the policy. I want to know that it's not going to be legal or ghost policy for you to treat me and my children this way. You know, it doesn't matter if a judge has it in for me. It's the fact that the system allows him to do that or her to do that. So I think in terms of, we're talking about defunding the police and how would we do that? We already have some systems in place. When you call and you say, you know, my pop-pop's having a heart attack, they send out the EMT. Our dispatch system already exists where you can send out specialization instead of a punitive force immediately, instead of a lethal force immediately. And that, you know, you could say, what if we had a system that was even more specialized, and instead of sending out someone with a gun for every single call, you sent out trained de-escalators, you sent out mental health workers? What if you had very specified training for particular calls and you sent out what was actually needed? You don't send someone with a gun to put out a fire, right? But we send out someone with a gun to do almost everything else. You know, a girl who lives in my neighborhood a few years back, she used to come and be like a mother's helper for me. She and I went to church together, and she's like a 13, 14-year-old girl, and I would have her come over and help me. And she lived a few blocks from me. I live in a historically Black neighborhood where the median household income is about $33,000 a year. So it's a poor, you know, around the poverty line, this neighborhood, and the policing here is just abysmal. And she had a call on her block, a domestic call, and they thought maybe something was going on in her home, like they went to the wrong home, or it was the house next door, they wanted to get into her property, and her dog was barking. She had two dogs, both of her dogs were barking, they were pit bulls, and the police shot the dogs, killed the dogs in her house, left the dead dogs there. And she came to work that day like it was regular, because it was. What's wrong? She's just a little down because the cops do what the cops do. We can have a better response plan. You don't have to send out someone with a gun for every little thing. I'm not saying that it's never going to be warranted, but there are many police forces in the world that do not carry guns.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jessica, that a reallocation of funds to bring in services that are sorely missing from our communities, like because police are responding to too many things. Police are responding to mental health issues. Why isn't it? And so a lot of the police killings actually happen to be as a result of a mental health call. You know, they get there and they don't know and here in Georgia, they literally killed a naked man who they got a mental health call. There's a naked guy who was a former Air Force dude, and he was suffering from PTSD, and he was naked and he was out in the street, and his behavior was clearly bizarre because he was having an episode, and he wound up dead. Now, how can a naked man be a threat to anybody, especially a highly trained, whatever you want to consider yourself, peace officer or police officer? I mean, you've got all of this stuff. You've got a taser, you've got the baton, you've got your hands. And anyway, I totally agree with you. You can't send people who consider themselves warriors to be, and then expect them to be peace officers. When I was in the Marine Corps, we when they a number of years ago they sent Marines to Beirut to be peacekeepers. I was out of the Marine Corps at that particular time, but that struck me as so bizarre because as a Marine, what I remember is we spent 11 weeks learning how to kill people and 0 weeks learning anything about peacekeeping. It was 11 weeks of boot camp, and then there's other training after that. And all of your training is about killing people, finding other ways to kill people, killing people from a distance, killing people close at hand. So why are you sending them to be peacekeepers? And it's the same with police. Why are you sending police into communities to do stuff that they are not trained to do when you realize that they are trained to be warriors, they're trained to shoot and tackle and wrestle, but not be peacekeepers?
Yeah, we're getting some more questions in about
Okay.
about this. One person asked, "What does defunding the police look like? Would the Camden model work nationwide?" I don't know what the Camden model is personally.
So Camden did. They essentially they disbanded their police force. You know, they completely disbanded it, and then officers had to reapply, and it was going to be a whole county instead of just a city. The new force, and they focused on community relations instead of quotas. So a big part of what pressures police officers is that they have a certain number of arrests to make. There's a quota system.
Quota, yeah.
And so, you know, you are looking for people to sort of catch in the act, and you know what that's like in parenting. Like, if your role as a parent is you're looking for to catch your children in wrongdoing, not that there should ever be that dynamic of paternalism between police officers and citizens, but just for the sake of argument, if you're looking for ways to catch someone in wrongdoing, you know that your relationship is going to be trash. I mean, it's just going to be, because and it's an overseer kind of, you know, mentality. And honestly, that's the history of policing, right? Is to find, wrangle, and bring back runaways, enslaved people. So it has a terrible history, and it continues today. But the Camden model, they disbanded their police force, and then everyone had to reapply, and many people chose not to. I don't know what the package was once you were laid off, but the whole force was laid off. And then they were offered to reapply, and new criteria, new plans were put in place, and with a focus on community relations instead of quotas. So that, they certainly have seen some success. I can't tell you that it's perfect. I don't know everything about it. But that's one possible way that defunding could look. Also, it's a bigger picture that we're not looking at. I think we have a little bit of tunnel vision, because we know what causes crime. You know what I mean? We know all the ways that these things happen. We know that poverty causes crime, but we don't look at poverty. We know that police are afraid they're going to meet a lethal weapon because our citizenry is overarmed. We know that too. I mean, there are a number of things that are in play here. That I saw one of the questions was, are there any forces in the world that we could model ourselves after? And there are. I mean, there are a number of places that don't have an armed police force. However, they also don't have a heavily armed population. Mm-hmm. And so some of it is, what are we willing to trade for our safety and for our freedom? And one of my skepticisms as to why Black people, why we are fighting as hard as we are, is because I don't know if white America is willing to trade their liberty, their right to bear arms any old which way, in protection of our lives, of Black lives. I don't know if they are willing to do that. And is that what it would take? Possibly. More gun control. Possibly. That could be part of the scenario, but certainly funding things that keep children well, that keep citizens, adults well, jobs, healthcare, these things, in the absence of them, crime goes up, and we know that. This is not news to anybody. If you don't have a job and you're not well, and you don't feel like, and your community is being terrorized. I did not have the experience that Conrad had growing up, where I was, pushed into the ground with a gun in my face. But I did grow up knowing that when 5-0 comes by, you run. I knew that. And if all of us kids were gathered somewhere and one starts running, we all start running. I mean, that's what I know. I know that when the police come, you are to be afraid. And that's because that's what my entire community's experience. So if we want to change that dynamic, we have to change the experience in the community. And if there is no healthcare, if there is no job for mom or dad, if there is no place for me to go after school, if the libraries are shut and my books are crap, and all these things, like, what do you expect kids to do? And our plan to put them in jail and not rehabilitate children that we lock up. We do lock up children, and then they go back and they go back and they go back.
Well, speaking of rehabilitation, Jessica, I was a director of an aftercare facility for ex-offenders before I started working for Mennonite Central Committee. So I did that for about 10 years, and it was in Pennsylvania. And when I started that work in 1990, I started that work in 1990. Pennsylvania had 16 state prisons. Now,
Right.
they were losing a lot of industry in Pennsylvania. So that was back when the Not in My Backyard crew, right? So anytime you talked about putting some kind of other institution in some neighborhood, it was the NIMBYs, the Not in My Backyard. And they had people in Harrisburg who were lobbying just to make sure that nobody was thinking about putting some kind of prison or aftercare facility in there. However, when the coal industry started to falter and the steel industry started to fail, those very same communities now had lobbyists in Harrisburg trying to get a prison in their neighborhood. And so, Jessica, within 10 years, and this started in about 1990, within 10 years, there were 33 state prisons.
So did you say 16? So doubled.
It doubled in 10 years. It doubled in 10 years. And there were still some on the drawing board, but it literally doubled in 10 years. And so when people ask about the prison industrial complex, they're not aware of statistics like those where because for prisons, it's if you build it, they will come. If you build it, we will fill it scenario. So once they build a prison, it has to be filled with somebody. And most often, 50, 60, 70, 80% of the bodies that are going to fill those prisons are going to be people of color. And who is going to bring those bodies to the prison? The police. It is the police's responsibility to find reasons to arrest people and to find reasons to get them into the system. Then, here's the most ridiculous part. I had a man in my program in 1975. No, this was in 1995. He had gotten, in 1975, he committed a crime. He was a drug addict. He had committed a crime, and he got a certain amount of time, and he got 5 years parole, right? So when I met him in 1995, he hadn't committed any new crimes, yet he still had 5 years parole. So I'm wondering, well, how does that happen? Every time you violate your parole, you lose all of your good time. So if he does 4 years and 11 months without getting in any trouble, so now he's only got 1 month left to be on parole, he goes out and has a beer, or he's in a car that gets stopped by the police for some reason. He's had a police contact, which he didn't initiate, let's say, but he had a police contact, which is a violation of your parole. Just a police contact is a violation of your parole. So you wind up back in a maximum security facility for 90 days. That's your parole violation. Plus you get all of your you lose all of your back time. So you spend 90 days in jail. If you had a job, you're most likely going to lose it. If you had an apartment, you're most likely going to lose that too. So now when you get back out on parole, you got 5 years parole to do, and you have nothing. Your job is gone. Your place where you lived is probably gone as well, and you're starting from scratch again. So we have these systems that are designed to keep people in, not let people out. And the police are the tip of the spear to that system.
Well, and then to add to that, so all that Conrad mentioned is what happens, if you violate parole. So then we ask why this Black man ran when the police asked to stop him. Well, would you run too? If you thought, I'm gonna have a police contact, I'm gonna violate parole now. I'm gonna lose probably my job. I'm gonna have 5 more years to do. I'm gonna spend 90 days in facility. Probably gonna lose where I'm living. Like, why did he run? That's why you run. That's why you run.
Yeah, why would you not run?
If I'm fast, I might not have that contact. I just might get away. And you know what? I would rather bet on my 2 feet than on the fact on the hope and guess and wish and prayer that this cop is going to treat me well. I would rather bet on my 2 feet. Now, I'm not fast, but some people are. The other thing, Conrad, sorry, Nick.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
The other thing is that, and you didn't, I don't think you mentioned, but I think you were sort of insinuating, is that, yeah, prison is big business, but these are also, they're private prisons. So not, it's big business in the sense that people are making money on these prisons. It's not just, these are not federal. I mean, these are private prisons. This is an actual business. And we have corporations who use prison labor, right? So you go to prison and slavery is illegal except as a form of punishment. So you are allowed to be forced to work. Starbucks, Whole Foods, JCPenney, Victoria's Secret. Who else? I said Whole Foods. There are a lot of corporations, McDonald's, Walmart. There are a lot of corporations that use prison labor. And it's not a simple thing to undo, but it has become a monster, yet doubled in 10 years is right.
There was a judge in Pennsylvania. there was a judge in
calling out our state
in upstate Pennsylvania who he himself went to prison for he was incarcerating young people, and he was getting a kickback from this private prison who he was sending them to. And they did an investigation. They found that he was over incarcerating people and that he was getting a kickback from the prison. So the more people you send, the more money for you, Judge.
Well,
he was a white guy.
Yeah. I was going to talk about white guys. So I appreciate hearing your thoughts on that. I think that's one of the challenges for talking to white people about this, is because so many of us want to talk about reform, because the very system is designed to commodify or make value off of Black and brown indigenous bodies that were designed to put you in prison if you're not white. Were designed also to protect you if you are, to protect us, to protect our property. And so I think a lot of white people being nurtured and grown and socialized in a way to see the police as friendly and respectful and there for you can hear that, there's some issues, so we should focus on reform rather than some of the more what we would call drastic measures like defunding. I think what it gets to for me, Jess, I love that you said it's a narrow view. You said it a bit back. A friend of mine I used to do some work with in Philadelphia, Reverend Naomi Lee Washington. She would say that.
Friend of mine too.
Yes, I remember her saying often that white supremacy limits your imagination, your creativity, and I hear that so often. It's this white question of, well, what else? As though nothing else could possibly exist without what we are so accustomed to having. And so just briefly, I don't want to ask you to restate anything you've said unless you feel called to, but we have another question here from Sean. So I just wanted to get some specific thoughts about what you think about, I guess, reform, which is what I think Jess already said was mild, versus some more ways of systemic change. So he asks if it's time it would be better spent changing the legal structure that hold police accountable for the crimes they commit, because typically now they get off pretty easily if anything even happens to them when they commit crimes. Is it worthwhile to work on changing that structure, the legal structures that don't punish police? Or is it better off, in your perspectives, to work more for the defunding, disbanding? What do you think would be more effective?
I actually think that I think that totally disbanding the police is scary to the police.
Mhm.
I think it's frightening to police unions, and to be frank with you, I I actually get a certain degree of glee right now, knowing that the police are afraid of us. Um,
Oh,
I, I mean, I just like that idea that now the police are afraid of us because we're making noise. We're the ones who are saying we're not taking it anymore. We've had enough. Something has to change. And so the idea of defunding the police is frightening to them, just as it would be frightening to anybody who, when they're talking about you losing your job,
mhm.
losing your livelihood, right? That should be frightening to anybody. So I get it on that level. Um, but I but I don't think I don't think defunding the police or dismantling the police means get rid of the police. I
Mm.
just don't believe that it means that. I, I do believe that it means let us work at finding effective ways to hold them accountable. Let us take power back. We've given them too much power and we
Mm.
need to take it back. The unions have too much power. Our politicians are frightened of them. The police have too much leverage. And where other unions have the leverage of, if you don't give us what we want, we're going on strike, the police don't have that leverage. The only leverage they have, I assume, is if you don't give us what we want, we're not going to arrest anybody. And what that means very often for municipalities, if police don't issue citations and arrest people, that's going to impact the community
Wow.
monetarily, because very often much of the budget in a particular municipality is based on fines and citations and tickets that police issue. So if the police just do a slowdown, like the police union did in New York a few years back, if they just decide to do a slowdown, we're not going to issue tickets, we're not going to arrest anybody, and it cuts into the municipality's funds. It throws their budget all out of whack. So the police have leverage, and so they sign these contracts that determine that police officers don't have to give statements when they hurt people, that you can't
Mm.
sue them, that they can't be fired. There's arbitration. There was a case in Philadelphia where there was an officer named D. Pasquale, and he killed a man named Moises de Jesus. He and a number of other officers beat that man to death, and they and this officer swore up and down that he never struck him. Well, it turned out that he lied. So he was convicted of lying to investigators and he was fired from the police force. After arbitration, though, the Philadelphia police force was forced to rehire him. And then 5 minutes after that, he killed Dante Dawson, who was sitting at a traffic light, who was unresponsive. I mean, the officer was yelling commands at him, and Dante was literally unresponsive. The officer didn't say he grabbed for a gun, he reached for a gun, he reached in his pocket. He was literally unresponsive, and now he's dead. Same police officer. So, so those are the kinds of things that they build into their contracts, and we've given them too much power. We have to take it back.
Mm.
And that's why they're scared of us right now, because we're talking about taking it back.
Conrad, you know that I love you, but I respectfully disagree. I do think that we can have a world without police. I do. I'm not
Okay.
saying that we don't have anyone respond, any armed people respond ever. So maybe we're saying something similar in the sense that I'm saying we disband police all together as we know it. I am saying that, and I do think that there's a lot of power that needs to be reclaimed. I agree with that as well. I think this forum is meant for us to be able to be on the same team, but also have difference of opinion, because I think the margin, the way Bell Hooks and Octavia Butler say, like, the margin is a place of creativity, because we have been forced to make things up as we go because the systems are not designed for us. And so I think we can think of something else. I do not think we, and I guess my concern is that if we're just trying to hold people accountable more, our entire legal system is a mess. And how do we even do that? You have people who are waiting without parole, without trial yet set, years. And so if we're just talking about holding more people accountable, who's going to pay the price of that? If the more cops going to trial, more cops getting arrested, more cops being held and bail set and things like that, what's going to happen to the kid who's picked up for holding a couple of ounces of weed, whatever it is? Like, we don't have this system that is running smoothly on any level, in terms of the justice system. Obviously many things, but the justice system, and I. Something maybe between what Conrad and I both want. He wants a heavy reform, and I would like it abolished. But
Yeah, look, we are demonstrating the argument that is happening right now. And the debate that we're having right now is that is the current debate. Do you demolish it, or do you try to? And that's the debate we have in every institution.
Yeah.
That we want to work with. That is the debate. Do you just dismantle it and tear it apart and start from scratch, or do you try to reform it? And it's everybody's got to make their argument on either side.
Well, what I will say, Conrad, and this is especially for you, because there have been a number of times we've been training together, and you have essentially taught me, where do we want to end up? Where do we want to get this? Where do we want them to end up? In this training? Where do we want them to land when we finish this segment, right? This particular topic. And it's sort of like a backward planning.
Right.
And so I think you and I want to end up in the same place, and then we're sort of backing up, how do we get there? And so what I would love to do is end up with a system that is not based on punishment, that is not based on violence. And if we want to end there, then how do we work backwards? What are the steps that get us there? Because right now, I don't think the system has anybody's restoration in mind. Mm-hmm. The system has in mind punishment and
I agree.
Right? Punishment and subduing and gain off of bodies. And so the whole thing, we have bail for when people, so if you're rich, you can get out. And if you're not, you sit in jail until your court date. If you're poor, your court date is who knows how many years in advance. If you're a rich guy, somehow miraculously, there's a hole in the schedule and there's room for you tomorrow, right? People die in prison waiting for their court date. And so I do not see, a reason why I don't see reform as an option is because unless we're going to reform the whole purpose of the system, which feels like disbanding, the purpose of the system is not to restore. There's nothing about it that's restorative. And we know that it's possible, because look at the difference in the way that we're treating the opioid crisis and the crack crisis.
Right.
So we know it's possible. We know that our country can say, oh my goodness, people are out of control, doing crimes and ODing on the streets. We live not too far from the epicenter of the opioid crisis in the country, right? Not too far from Kensington. And it literally looks like The Walking Dead out there sometimes. Like, there's just people. Sadly, you hate to compare people this way, but there's people just kind of wandering, lost in their own high at the moment. And it's tragic, but we do see a very different response because the majority of those people are white people. You see a different response from the powers that be, saying, well, this is horrific because now it's little Billy and little Bobby who are doing it. And before we were just locking people up. We were just criminalizing people's illness. So we know that we can do things differently. We know it's possible. We know it's possible because you've never seen a little white girl with her neck under someone's knee, under a police officer's knee. So you know that they don't have to do that. They choose to do that.
Yeah, and I think you make an excellent point, Jessica, and it's it's a matter of who are we policing, who are we, and what is the desired outcome. I think you're 100% right. I think you're right, and I agree with you also that it takes imagination for us right now to imagine to imagine what the world can, what is the desired outcome, and let us be creative about trying to make it happen. I do like the idea that the police are scared, though.
I know. a little icing on the cake there.
That's good. There's a graphic I saw. I'll post it on the Roots of Justice Facebook page, so other folks can see it too. That kind of talks about some of these things around defunding the police and imagining what it would be like if somebody is walking down the street mumbling to themselves and acting erratically, and you dial 911, a crisis intervention person, a trained person to deal with mental health issues,
Exactly.
unarmed, shows up.
Now
We have cops working all hours of the day now. Why can't we make sure if we're defunding police, we start funding people that are trained to handle those things? Right. The other thought I have about reform is that it gets tricky when you talk about different systems. The education system, even though it shouldn't be used to, I think the education system is often used too much to discriminate based on a person's educational status. Meaning, if you don't have a high school degree, you're still worthy of, you're still valuable, you're still worthy of a thriving life and a thriving wage. However, I also think the educational system is inherently something that does some positive things. Policing, however, I think is different because the purpose of it, its origin is grounded in violence, racism, and white supremacy. So is there really anything inherently good in policing that is redeemable, that can be reformed for a valuable purpose? I don't envision, especially, I think one of you said earlier, how armed we are as society. So I'm not sure. I don't have a firearm. I'm not sure if there's a situation where I would need to have somebody with a gun come and do something. Well, there's a lot of guns around, so I don't know if I'd want no one to have armed, police at some point. But it makes me think a lot about how we can reform a system that was never actually meant to serve everyone. It was meant to dehumanize and commodify folks.
Well, it's the same with the education system. So I gotta push back a little bit on what you said about the education system, because I think the education system was designed to promote white supremacy. That's why we needed something like Latin American history and African American history, because there's a lot of unspoken communication that happens in our education system, and it's designed to make people of color hate themselves. The assumption that we all come away with for little white kids and little children of color is that anything good that's ever happened in the world actually happened as a result of white people. We actually had a senator, Stephen King. He was actually, was it Steve King that was just ousted? But he actually said that. Yes. Yeah, he actually said that. And I can't blame him for saying that. He's speaking to the way he was educated. He was educated to believe that every good thing that's ever happened in the world is the result of white men, not just white people, but white men. And so he's speaking, I'm assuming he was educated in the United States, and I'm assuming he was educated within the same system that all of us are educated. He's just naming stuff. He's naming things that are pushed into all of us, all of our children. So there's this self-hatred, and the unspoken communication is that everything good was invented by or thought up by white people. So we have to have Black History Month so that we can make the Black people think that some of their people may have had a few significant things to happen, but it's always the same ones. We don't want to go deeper. We don't want to talk about hydrocortisone, how people would just not be using it at all had it not been for a Black man figuring out how to mass produce it, because it was so expensive that it was impossible for average people or anybody else to get to use it, until a Black chemist decided that, you know what, this doesn't have to be that hard. And he figured out a way to mass produce it, and now you could buy it in CVS. But so there's all kinds of, all kinds of little things like that that we don't teach and we don't talk about, that has this piece of unspoken communication in it, in our teaching system, that everything good came from white people. So now we have Latin American History Month, African American History Month, and it's always the same people. Martin Luther King, Sojourner Truth. We don't demand that they learn more either. Second grade, Martin Luther King, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass. Eighth grade, Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth. 12th grade, Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth. Same people. It's the only subject in school where we don't demand progress. We don't demand that it be progressive. We don't demand that it go deeper. Even in regular social studies, children, when they start doing civics in 4th grade, they're not doing the same civics lesson in 10th grade.
Right.
But we do that with Latin American history, and we do it with African American history. Same people. So it's designed to have this unspoken communication, and the education system is designed to make people of color hate themselves. We could have a whole nother conversation about that.
I think Nick, going back to how you opened the conversation in terms of, I think you said, or you earlier on, how Reverend Naomi Washington Leapart had mentioned about whiteness, sort of white supremacy and whiteness as a concept, crushing imagination. I wonder if it would be something that could be tolerated by white America to take the lead, to take instruction and direction from people of color on how to restructure this system. Mm. If there's an acknowledgement of, not that a white individual has no imagination, but that whiteness itself has a hard time imagining anything outside of the perpetuation of this system, could we consider elevating our voices? Okay, you've had a chance at crafting this thing. Can I have a crack at it? Just something to ponder.
Yep.
And I think what feels very tricky is that there's always another correction. There's always another line of policing from white America on Black bodies and on Black life. So, now it's the uprising, or what they call the riots, and looting and burning buildings and being violent, and that's not okay. But there is no other. There's no okay protest. They didn't like Kaepernick taking a knee. Mm. They don't like it. It's every single way that you might protest is unacceptable. And so I feel like there's a very limited imagination, I guess. I'll just use that word again. There's a limited imagination for what is possible, because what it feels like is there is nothing that you can do except for be subservient to be acceptable as a Black or brown body in this country. And anytime you step out of that line and prioritize your joy or your freedom, you will be corrected, and very often harshly so.
Mm. Yeah, I think that when you're trying to bring about social change, social justice, and all you do is everything that you do is peaceful and nonviolent. History has shown what you get is a pat on the head and a attaboy for doing it in a nonviolent way. But the shit that you're trying to change is not going to change. However, I appreciate you. I appreciate you. I appreciate your thoughts. Thank you. Now go back to your corner. So it's almost like white society will not listen until somebody throws a trash can through a window. And I am not advocating for anybody to throw a trash can through a window. Let me say that clearly. So I'm not advocating for that. I'm just acknowledging that things don't, that people don't get listened to on social justice issues until the threat of destruction of some kind is there, and it shouldn't be that way. However, that's what we see.
Yeah.
Yep.
We could go on and on.
But we can't.
Well, we better not.
Well, I think it's clear we have more opportunity for this to keep happening. So thank you, Jess and Conrad, for sharing your thoughts. I want to make sure folks are aware, folks that are listening, we are planning some more of these. We don't have exactly a schedule or content for many, but one thing we are planning for is one of them called Calling All Karens. It's by and for white women. I also want to ask for any donations so we can continue to develop content and push our work forward. You can make donations at rootsofjusticetraining.org/donate. rootsofjusticetraining.org/donate. So I'm just going to say thank you all for everybody that was tuning in. Justin, Conrad, I'll let you just close out with a couple words you want to say, and I'll say bye. Thank you, folks.
Yeah, all I need to say is bye. I would suggest also that we do another one of these, and we focus specifically on explaining more and go a little bit deeper in what we mean about systemic. That we're talking about manifestations of racism that do not require individual intent.
Yes. I'll be here.
And so will I.
Yes, yeah.